Hi, I just wanted to welcome you all along tonight to listen to our presentation on Norway. Thanks for taking the time out of your evening to join us. So welcome back to our return travellers and welcome on board to our new guest joining us for the first time. We hope that you get some great information from tonight and get inspired to hit the trails in Norway. I'm Amanda. I'm the destination manager for our European Alps team, which takes in a number of different trips from our Dolomites and Slovenia trips and now includes our new Norway trips. And
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark. I'm the GM from Raw Travel, and I did some of the research for the St. Olav's Way walk that we'll be talking about tonight.
Perfect. So tonight we'll go through both our Norway trips in more detail, so which are our Lofoten Island trip and our St. Olav's trip. Hopefully this will give you a bit more insight into these trips so you can see if either of these hikes or maybe both of them is something that you may be on your radar in the future. We do have a few clients that have chosen to do both hikes and they work really well together. We'll have some time for questions at the end and we'll give away a few prizes through the presentation, which includes a pair of gaiters and a pair of hiking socks. And please feel free to put any of your questions in the chat box and we'll answer them towards the end of our session. Hopefully we'll answer most of your questions along the way. We're really excited that both of these trips are about to kick off for the 2026 season, which are our first departures, and our first clients are actually just heading out today.
So in terms of getting there is the ETIAS system that's been introduced into Europe during 2026. So just be aware of that. It acts a bit like a visa system, but it's just pre-authorization for travel. So with that one, you do need a passport that's valid for at least a minimum of 3 months from departure, but we would suggest 6 months just to be safe there. You need proof of funds and return tickets required as well. At the moment, best flight route is probably with Thai Airlines through Bangkok. Takes about 25 hours, depending on where you're flying from. So you're going to fly into Oslo, and that's accessible from most of the major Australian cities as well. And then to get onto St. Olav's, it actually requires a bus or train ride from the city to the start of the walk. Dovre is one of the starting points. That's about a 4-hour train ride. And the other option we have is Opdale, which is about a 5-hour train ride, both direct. And actually a really nice part of the experience as well. I think Amanda undertook that late last year.
Yeah.
If you're headed to the Lofoten Islands, it's about an hour and 40 minutes into a domestic flight, that is, into Narvik Airport there.
Lovely. So let's chat about the guided and self-guided options. We have the difference in the two itineraries. So a Lofoten Island trip is scheduled as a guided trip only, and that's mainly due to the logistics of getting between the locations as there's limited public transport. This trip is guided by Julian Temple, who not only has previous experience guiding in this area, but he's one of our really popular guides. If you've maybe done TMB or our Dolomites trip, you may have come across Julian. With St. Olav's, we run this mainly as a self-guided trip using the Raw Travel app for navigation. It's a lot easier logistically wise, and you can walk from location to location with a train ride on one day. And the trail suits itself more for a self-guided trip without too many logistics for the traveller to negotiate.
Yeah, so just a brief comment on the guided versus self-guided option. I was actually recently in Japan and I got to experience both of those things. So I guess the advantages of a guided option is that guide provides a lot of value in terms of interpretation, of cultural, historical, environmental things that are going on around you. So it really brings the walk alive that way. Might be a good option too if you're less confident, not with a map, or you haven't walked as much. It's nice to have someone there to sort of help you along the way. And I think the other thing with a guided option is you're going to be there with a group of people, 8 to 12 people. I think it's 10 for some of our walks in Lofoten. And it's just a really nice way to connect with like-minded people. And I know there's some really nice stories at Raw where people have become future travel buddies because they've met on a Raw trip on one of the guided options. And then there's the self-guided option as well. And that really gives you freedom, I suppose, would be the main thing. So you choose when you're going to get up, how fast you walk, when you rest, and all that sort of thing as well. So there's still opportunities to meet other pilgrims and travellers along the way, but you've just got that level of freedom.
Yeah. Great. So now we're going to move on to the Lofoten Islands. So we're going to have a little chat about this trip. So this is definitely one of those wow locations for trekking, as you can see from the slide. Next month, we have our first departures heading out on the trail, which is really exciting. And if you're on social media, stay tuned, as we're hoping to share some of our photos from the first groups. When we launched this trip in about July last year, we were pretty overwhelmed with the response we received, with all 3 trips selling out within 3 days, which was really fantastic. So it's pretty clear to us that our clients are starting to look at travelling further abroad than mainland Europe and taking an interest in travelling in Scandinavia and maybe looking for something a little bit new. This place is definitely known for its dramatic landscape, as you can see. The scenery is spectacular, where the mountains reach the sea. And for any avid photographers, I think this would be really hard to get a bad shot in this area. A bit about the history of the Lofotens. The island has a fairly long and fascinating history, which is mostly tied to the sea and cod fishing. For centuries, cod was Norway's most important industry, and Lofoten became one of the country's key fishing regions. And this was mainly due to the annual migration of Arctic cod to the islands each winter. The dried cod and stockfish were exported across all of Europe, and this has really helped shape Norway's economy. Obviously, Norway is really rich in Viking history as well, and with it being woven into much of the country's identity and shaping a lot of its culture. Today, when you visit the island, you can still see the strong maritime history with traditional fishing villages and those beautiful, colourful row bars dotted everywhere. And although fishing is still one of the main industry, tourism is definitely catching on and becoming another big industry in this area.
Yeah, so a really iconic place to visit. And just so you get a sense of where we are on the map, you can see Norway sticking out there. And on the inset, you see a little blue dot there. And so you can see the Lofotens are up in the northwest corner of Norway. So it's about 300 kilometres that you'll cover from north to south, and a number of walks that you'll undertake with Julian, your guide there. And there is a ferry crossing involved in one place as well.
Perfect. So we'll go through a little bit about the structure of the itinerary and the trail conditions and distances you might trek each day. So we currently only have one itinerary in the Lofotens, and as I said, it's a guided trip, and that's a 10-day itinerary. We have a maximum of 10 trekkers on each trip, and for 2027 we have 4 set guided departures, mainly in June and July, and we already have a few bookings on those departures. We've graded this trip as challenging. It's more to do with the terrain and elevations rather than the distances trekked each day. And as you can see from the slides, the elevations are quite steep, and you can expect somewhere between 350 metres to 700 metres in elevation gain each day. You will trek around between 5 and 12 kilometres each day, with about 9 to 10 being the average. And the total kilometres you will trek for this trip will be about 75. For this trip, it does start and finish at Hardstad Evenes Airport, which, as we said earlier, is about an hour and 40 minutes domestic flight from Oslo. You'll stay at the airport hotel that first night, where you'll meet the rest of the group and your guide, and then you'll head off the following morning. On the trails, you can expect a mix of grassy ridgelines, dirt paths, some rocky sections, and occasional boggy ground. If the trail's wet and muddy and the climbing is steep, you can expect that the trekking can be quite slow. So that's why the kilometres are quite short on the trail compared to other hikes. However, you always are usually rewarded for that hard work with magnificent views. You'll definitely come across some striking landscapes in this area. So think jagged peaks with sweeping coastal views, and that contrast between the blue water, white sand, green mountains is just beautiful. You also might have some alpine plateaus, which are generally covered with your tufts of grass and wildflowers. Moving on to the accommodation. So the accommodation for this trip is a bit more unique than some of our other trips. You'll stay the couple of nights in hotels, namely the first night and then a night towards the end of the trip. But the main accommodation will be in these gorgeous row bars or fishing huts, as you can see on the slide. We have a couple of locations where we stay 3 nights in these cabins in separate locations, and they're on a shared basis. So the cabins will have a number of bedrooms, generally 2 or 3, and you'll have your own room, but it's usually a shared bathroom and then a central living area. As you can see from the first picture here, this is a shared living space in one of the cabins, and then the second photo is a double room in one of the hotels. We can offer some single rooms, mainly in the hotels. However, we do have the ability to provide some single supplements in the cabin, but this is more based on it will depend on the number of clients booked on the trip, the configuration of those clients, and also the rooming configurations in the cabins. But if you'd like a single supplement, please always just ask us. Obviously, we'll try to help you where we can. You can see from these pictures how lovely the accommodation is. Most of them are set on the water. And one good thing about staying a number of nights in one location is not only do you get to unpack your bags, there's also the option of not to trek on one of the days if you're not feeling up to it, as you can stay at the accommodation for that day. This trip does include luggage transfers, and all of our guests are transported around the island in a van, which your guide Julian will drive, and then we have another van that will transport all of the main bags between each location.
Fantastic. Time to talk about the food. And whenever I travel, I'm all about the food. And the good news is you won't go hungry on this trip, because we actually send a dedicated cook along with you, so we can cater for all your different dietary requirements. Most of the evening meals are just shared, and they'll be prepared in those traditional fishing cabins, which will make it an extra bit special, using locally sourced ingredients where possible. So dinners commonly feature fresh fish, chicken, meat options. The Norwegians are into their hearty kind of stews, so good cold climate food, and then of course accompanied by vegetable salads and that sort of thing as well. Lunches will take care of you there as well. Generally packed for a day on the trail. Expect sandwiches, fruit, and all sorts of trail snacks as well to keep you going. And then last of all, breakfast. So typically continental style, cereals, eggs, toast. What else have we got? Juice, tea and coffee, and that sort of thing as well.
Beautiful. I don't think you'll go hungry on this walk. So when is the best time to trek? As I mentioned earlier, our trips depart in June and July in the summer months, and this is basically not only to miss the severe weather of winter, but also to take in the summer solstice. But even though it will be summer, don't expect really high temperatures like that you'll get in mainland Europe, as generally it gets to the high teens or low 20s in summer. Like all destinations, it's really hard to predict the weather. That's probably the most questions we always get asked. What's the weather going to be like? But you can always expect some rainfall even in summer. So it's always good to be prepared. Although generally the rain in summer can come in passing showers rather than constant rainfall. So fingers crossed that you don't get any rain on the trip.
So if you're thinking if this walk is right for you, I guess it would appeal to anyone that obviously loves trekking, but has a decent level of fitness as well and enjoys a guided trip. In terms of describing it, the profile of it, it sort of falls into the adventure category or the nature category, as opposed to the pilgrimage that we'll talk about when we get onto St. Olav. So I wouldn't put an age limit on it. Age is just a number, but there is some, pretty significant ascent and descent as well. So you want to make sure you've got that sort of hill climbing fitness. And if I was going to compare it to some other walk that I've done or an area where I've traveled to before, I think New Zealand's a really good example. And it's, really where those mountains come out of the sea, and you've got the fjords and that sort of thing as well. So similar sort of landscape.
Yeah, definitely. So on to preparation for this hike. So as Mark said, it is as classed as challenging, and you'll need a good fitness base and some good cardio and leg strength. It's probably slightly different than, say, a Camino where you'd need lots of kilometres under your feet. And maybe you're walking on flat dirt paths, as the kilometres aren't really long on this trip, but the gradient is quite steep and the terrain can be quite boggy. So we always recommend having a regular walking schedule, but make sure you include plenty of hills or stairs for cardio. And I would always recommend some strength work for your legs. It's always a good option to do some cross training if you can on a variety of surfaces, just to help with your agility while you're out on the track. Mark will talk a little bit towards the end of the session as what to pack for this trip.
So we're going to have our first spot prize. All you need to do is pop your answers in the chat. And the question we have for you is, what is one of the main industries of the Lofoten Islands other than tourism? Hopefully you've been listening.
Yes.
So once again, just put your answer in the chat there and we'll draw the winners at the end of the presentation.
Perfect. So now we're going to move on to our St. Olav's Way, which is our other Norway trip. And this is a self-guided departure. Whereas Lofoten is all about the spectacular views, etc., this hike is more about more of a pilgrimage walk, tracing the steps of St. Olav's and discovering the history of the Vikings. Although it is classed as a pilgrimage, it still has stunning scenery, lots of Norwegian farmlands, traditional fir forests, crystal clear lakes. Like, you're in Norway, it's never going to be too bad. But a little bit of history of this hike. So it traces the journey of King Olav II, who died in the year 1030 at the Battle of Stiklestad. And shortly after his death, Olav was declared a saint, and his burial site in Trondheim became a major place of pilgrimage. Like many of your other pilgrimages around the world, there's always a number of routes that lead you to the end, and this one is no different. So there's 9 different paths threading through Norway, Finland, Sweden, that all lead to Nidaros Cathedral in Trondheim.
So if we take a look at the map there, you can see it starts down in the south of Norway and just really goes up through the middle there. So yeah, we're offering those 2 sections, one from Dovre and one from Oppdal. But yeah, a north-south experience through the middle.
Great. So as we said, there are 2 itineraries, and they'll be on the Gudbrandsdalen Trail. The whole trail is approximately 650 kilometres long. However, like all new areas we hike in, we only add on a few sections to start with, and as time goes on, we'll add on to these sections if we can. Pilgrims only really restarted walking these trails in about the 1990s. So you can imagine it's relatively quiet compared to some of your other Caminos. In 2015, I think they had around 700 hikers for the year, and last year there was approximately 1,000 hikers. So compared to Camino Francis, which would have had around 500,000 hikers finish the last 200 kilometres of that trek last year. So it is starting to grow, and I think in the next few years, coming up to the anniversary of Olaf's death, it will definitely gain some momentum. So if you're looking for a quieter trail, this is probably the trail for you. If you're looking for lots of other hikers and camaraderie of groups of other hikers, I'm not sure you'll get that on this trail. So we're currently the only Australian operator on this trail, so we're super happy to get in on the ground level. I'm really excited to see how this pilgrimage will grow over time. So the first itinerary we have is our 14-day hike, and that's from Dovre to Trondheim. So it takes in the Dovre Plateau. The other itinerary doesn't take in this section of the hike. But I really love this section. I went there in September and hiked over did this hike from Dovre. And if you can, I'd definitely suggest you take this in. So the plateau doesn't open until June. So this itinerary can't really start until later. But the Oppdal itinerary does start a little bit earlier, and that's mainly due to weather, because there's a chance of snow, etc., on the plateau before, say, mid-June. It's definitely the harder of the 2 itineraries because climbing up over the plateau lends itself to a bit higher elevation. So you can expect to average about between 300 to 600 metres each day on this itinerary. But when you go over the Dovre Plateau, you'll reach up to 750 metres. It's classed as a moderate to challenging grading, and you'll average around 16 to 19 kilometres a day, obviously with some shorter kilometres, but we do have one day that is a 27-kilometre day, but we do have an option to shorten that day with public transport if you wish. The types of terrain you can expect on this trails are obviously the Dovrey Plateau. So as you could see from the last slide, how open that was, you can see for miles, it's just beautiful. But you can also expect fire tracks, forest trails, some peat bogs as shown here. There can definitely be some boggy sections on this trail. Even though it's summer, it can still be really wet in some areas. So some of the peat bogs you'll be able to step through on rocks. Other areas will have bridges or boardwalks to help you get across. Poles and gaiters are really a good recommendation for this walk, but we'll talk more about that towards the end when we cover that off in the gear. Our Opdale to Trondheim, the 10-day itinerary. So that is about approximately, you'll travel 135 kilometres and you'll go up to about the highest point about being 500 metres. It's possible to start this itinerary from May, as you're obviously not going over the Dovrey Plateau. So it is slightly easier and it is graded as a moderate hike. Once again, you'll average between that 16 to 19 kilometres a day, with the long day in this itinerary, but that does have the option of public transport to shorten it by about 6 kilometres. And the elevation is between 300 to 500 metres, ascending and descending each day. Once again, the trail will be similar to your Dovrey Plateau, or Dovrey itinerary, except you won't be taking in the plateau, but you can still expect fire trails, forest trails, and peat bogs on this itinerary as well. Onto the accommodation. So this trip has a real mix of accommodations, from hotels to farmhouses and your basic pilgrim accommodation. This slide is one of the pilgrim places you stay at on the second night of the Dovrey trip. It's called Foxdugu. And there are a number of cabins on this property, but you do have your own room. There will be communal eating areas and shared bathrooms, but it also has its own little chapel on this property, which is really cute. And during the season, they have a chaplain who provides a small service each evening. Although some accommodations are basic, they are really nice and cozy, and I found them all to be really clean. So some of the pilgrim accommodations do have facilities for cooking, and which we'll talk about food in a minute. And there is a daily luggage transfer included each day on this trip. This is one of the hotel style accommodations. It's called Jerkin Hotel, which has been welcoming guests for over 1,200 years. And this place was really spectacular. I loved it there. So as you can see from the first slide here, some of the hotels or the accommodations are furnished in typical Norwegian style, and a Jerkin hotel had lots of these little lounge rooms, as you can see, or sitting areas, as you can see from the first slide. The second is a guest house at Kongsvoid, where you have your own room and own ensuite. There are a couple of farmhouse stays on this hike, which I really loved. They're really enjoyable. You do have your own room depending on how many guests or what the setup is, and the bathroom can usually be shared depending on how many people are staying there. So the hotel accommodation does have ensuite bathrooms for each room. So it's a really nice mixture of accommodations. You can see from the third slide here, or the slide on the right, that was in the Foxdugu, where you stay on the second night. So you would have your own room for that night.
Okay, a bit more about the food. It's a little different on St. Olave's than it is in Lofoten. So when you're staying at either hotels or farmhouses, your meals will be catered for. Some meals will be quite traditional Norwegian food, so lots of meats, game, potatoes, that sort of thing. And if you haven't tried moose or reindeer before, this could be your opportunity. Once again, though, we can cater for any sort of dietary requirements, vegetarian, gluten-free, all that sort of stuff. look after you in that way. In some of the more simple pilgrim accommodations, you will need to self-cater, and there are catering facilities. So we actually provide an app, and we'll talk about the app in a moment, but that will give you details of where to buy food for your self-catering, including links to supermarkets and opening times and that sort of thing, because sometimes they are closed on Sundays.
Yeah.
So generally, if you're self-catering, it would be dinner for the night and then breakfast and lunch for the following day as well. And if you had excess food that you didn't want to carry and you were sticking to your weight limits, you could put that in your main bag and have it transported.
Yeah, as I said earlier, the Dovre to Trondheim hike starts in mid to late June and runs through to early September. And the Opdale to Trondheim runs from mid-May, later in May to September, as obviously you're not taking in the Dovre Plateau. So it's Norway, so always expect some changing conditions. And it is summer when our trips are running. So hopefully the weather will be stable, although I spoke about earlier, there's always a chance of rain during the summer months. Again, like Lofoten, it is certainly a lot cooler than mainland Europe throughout summer, and you won't get those really high temperatures. So that should make the hiking really a bit more enjoyable. So the best months for walking this, I'd say, are June and July. Like all of our raw trips, a good walking fitness base is recommended for your preparation. I always say to include some hill training, a little more if you're doing the Dovre Plateau, and always good to add some strength work into the mix, some agility and balance work if you can. With regards to weather, there is a risk if you're climbing over the Dovre Plateau. You need to be mindful of any storms, etc. And the weather can be a bit unstable and unpredictable. So it's always best to check the weather prior to hiking for safety precautions. They do have a warning up before you start heading over the plateau to advise you not to travel over there if there's any storms in the near future. So communication and mobile coverage, I had really good mobile coverage for the whole of the trip. There was the odd spot you may be out of range, but overall really good. So make sure you purchase a SIM or an eSIM for this trip. Trondheim and the cathedral. So Trondheim is obviously where you end with both of these itineraries, and it's a really beautiful, vibrant, colourful city to end your trip. I really loved it here. Obviously, the trail finishes at the cathedral, so it's definitely worth a visit to the cathedral, but there is a bit to do in Trondheim. So if you have extra time, it's definitely worth staying on for a day or so. I'm sure you really enjoy it. They do hold a religious festival in Trondheim at the end of July for 3 days each year, and this is centred around the legacy of King Olav II. So it is a really special way to take in, or something special to take in at the end of the hike if the timing works for you to trek during that time. Trail markers, pilgrim passport. So along the way, lots of various trail markers, and the trail was really well signposted. I was quite surprised. I know that they do have a pilgrim association, and they have just gone through the trail because it's the start of the season to make sure all the trail markers are in good order and that you can see them all. So you will see from this slide, there is a number of different markers that show the St. Olaf motif. But you will come across these even in the middle of forest. They'll be hanging from the tree, and it was really easy to follow. So there's also some history and information on signs in each town along the way, which is really good information to read. Like many of the other caminos, you will receive a pilgrim passport at your first location, and there is plenty of chances to collect stamps along the way at churches or accommodations. I was a little bit out of season, so I didn't see any other stamps out in the forest or anything, but I can imagine during the season that would be quite a few different locations to get those stamps. You do need to complete the last 100 kilometres of the trail to receive your official certificate and the Olaf letter. And you can arrange this at the cathedral in Trondheim, which is a really lovely way to commemorate your hike. In the year 2030. That will mark the 1000th year since the death of St. Olav. And leading into this anniversary, the Pilgrim Association will be holding extra festivals, etc., over the next few years. So, yeah, that's something really exciting to look forward to.
Yeah, good one. Just what was your sort of favourite single moment in Norway?
Yeah, I really love the farm stay. So I really enjoyed it. The one of the ladies you stay with, she's really lovely. They're happy to show you around the farm. I would have stayed there extra if I had time. So it's really nice to learn about their lifestyle, how they run their property, etc. So it really gives you good insight into how the Norwegians live, especially the farmers. So yeah, that'd definitely be one of my highlights of this trip.
Great.
The other one I actually really enjoyed was having a bit of solitude. So I live a pretty busy lifestyle. So it was just nice to be out in nature, pristine conditions, and leave the noise and busyness of everyday life behind me. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, who this walk is for? I guess the ideal sort of traveller profile is, again, anyone who loves trekking, has a good level of fitness, and is confident with self-guiding. Obviously, there are those trail markers there, but just a bit of confidence around that would help you out as well. And I think I already sort of mentioned this. It is more of a pilgrimage. But does sort of pass through that farmland, but also some nature or national park sort of elements as well.
Yeah.
So packing and preparation. Just before I get into this, I'll ask you a question, Amanda. Favorite piece of gear that you take when you're walking?
I'd have to say hiking poles. Yeah, I think they're really good to help balance you, especially when it's a bit boggy, or you're walking across rocks, etc. Or later in the day when you start to get a bit tired. They can really help power you up the hills.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's one of my favourite pieces of gear too. I'd probably add to that a power bank. I don't mind taking a power bank, and I think if you're using your phone for navigation and taking photos and film and whatever else, it's a really good idea to make sure the battery lasts. Don't mind a buff either, and of course we give people a free buff. But in terms of what you need to take for either of these trips to Lofoten or St. Olaves, you're just going to need a day pack. Probably around 30 litres is going to be enough. And in terms of what to wear, you could get any sorts of conditions in terms of weather. We have had or heard of really hot weather in Norway, but average temperature is more like 20 degrees. So that layering principle, I think, is really important, where you can just have a number of thin layers that you can take off to cool down or layer up if you want to get warm. So I would use a base layer of thermals, polypro or merino, stuff that if it gets wet still keeps you warm. So I'd stay away from the cotton sort of option. And then I'd go for a quick dry layer of activewear that you get from one of your outdoor stores. So quick dry t-shirt and probably shorts for me. A polar fleece or some kind of warm layer, and then a waterproof layer as well. So waterproof pants and waterproof jacket as well. Walking boots are probably a good idea on these walks just for the ankle support, and gaiters wouldn't go astray either. So gaiters just help keep the mud if you're navigating those bogs out of your boots. And we've mentioned hiking poles already. So for St. Olaves, I think you could access gear at the start of the trek, but perhaps not for Lofoten.
Yeah, unless you're staying in Oslo. But one thing I will recommend for when I did the St. Olaf's, I waterproofed my boots a number of times before I went, and that was fantastic because it was quite wet when I was there, and the water just repelled off my boots. So I didn't end up with wet boots or wet socks, and therefore avoiding any blisters. So that's one bit of advice I would like to pass on.
Okay, spot prize number 2. You know the drill. Put your answers in the chat. The question is, what year will mark 1,000 years since St. Olav died?
Yeah, perfect. So we'll move on to the app.
Okay,
popping your answers in.
Thanks, Amanda. We do have our own Raw Travel app. If you've travelled with us before, you'll have experienced that. And we've just done some really cool upgrade features as well. So probably the main things that you get out of the app are the navigation element. You're a little blue dot and you can see your trail and points of interest along the way. So it helps you actually navigate. There's a day-to-day itinerary there with details of your accommodation, what meals are included, instructions for baggage transfers, and that practical sort of information. There's some emergency contact information. There's weather information. And there's actually a new messaging feature as well, so we can message you and you can message us as well.
Yeah, great.
So final tips and takeaways. 2 really good alternatives to hiking in Norway. Diverse trips with different sorts of offerings, whether it's that nature adventure experience or the pilgrimage that you want to experience. They're both spectacular, taking in that landscape of Norway. So great for clients to experience too. Somewhere different to mainland Europe. We heard how busy the Camino de Santiago is, 500,000 people on it. So it's a really nice way to escape the crowds if you like a bit more elbow room. And I think particularly during that June, July, August in Europe as well, where, I've been in Spain in August and it was 45 degrees. So it's going to be a cool escape for sure.
Yeah, perfect. So we might move on to some questions. So Mark, if you just want to read out, we have a few people put some questions in the chat.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks, Kerry, for your question. And Amanda's a perfect person to answer this one. Can you do the St. Olave's trip as a single person?
So yes, you can. So when I went, I travelled solo by myself. So we can definitely do it as a solo traveller. Obviously, we like to ensure that you have enough experience to do it if you're self-guiding by yourself and that you're confident to do that. But definitely no problem sending people out solo.
Okay, and Nicola asks, how much of the hike is on asphalt?
Yeah, so not obviously much with Lofoten. With you saying Olav, there was a couple of times heading towards accommodation, so it might be the last kilometre or 2 that you may need to come down off the trail and you will have a little bit of asphalt, but not very much at all.
Great. And are bugs a problem at all? Anything that nibbles on you? Or?
There can be some times where the flies I have seen can be quite bad, and obviously with a lot of water laying around, there can be some mosquitoes. So we always say, make sure that you take your repellent and, cover up and things like that just to avoid that being bitten by anything.
Yep, no worries. And I think we might have mentioned this, but we'll ask the question again. How do you get to Optal?
So from Oslo, there is a train that goes direct to Optal. To get to Dovre, you can also catch a train from Oslo or a train and a bus. So they're quite easy locations to get to.
Okay, and it sounds like we have Kim here, who's a repeat customer. She asks, how does the Lofoten Islands compare in difficulty to the Julian Alps and coast trip in Slovenia?
Yeah, so I would say it's a little bit harder than the Julian Alps and coast. With the Julian Alps and coast, you're only really doing some elevation on the first couple of days, whereas Lofoten, you're kind of climbing each day and it's probably a little bit steeper elevation. So, but I think if you've done Julian Alps, you'll be definitely fit enough if you're prepared to do a bit more training with some cardio. So thanks everyone for your questions. Great, and hopefully we've answered them all really well. So we have some winners of our spot prizes.
We do, and we'll get your details. So hang around. But Helen has won our gaiters, and Stephen has got some socks to wear.
Yeah, perfect. So we both had the correct answers. So great.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up there then. Thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us. I hope it's been informative and helpful for you to hear a little bit our trips to Norway.
Yeah, so if you have any further questions or would like any further information, you can reach out to me at the email address displayed on the screen, or give me a call in the office on our office number at any time. I'm always happy to chat about all things Norway. So thanks again for joining us, and we can't wait to see you on the trails of Norway.